Good morning, Central. Happy Pentecost. Because it's Pentecost, of course, we have to sing about fire, or fire, as Michael says. So we're going to do some Alicia Keys today. She's just a girl and she's on fire, hotter than a fantasy, lonely like a highway. She's living in a world and it's on fire, filled with catastrophe, but she knows she can fly away. Oh, she's got both feet on the ground and she's burning it down. Oh, she's got her head in the clouds and she's not backing down. This girl is on fire. This girl is on fire. She's walking on fire. This girl is on fire. Looks like a girl, but she's a flame, so bright she can burn your eyes. Better look the other way. You can try, but you'll never forget her name. She's on top of the world, hotter than her hottest girl. Say, oh, we got both feet on the ground and we're burning it down. Oh, got our head in the clouds and we're not coming down. This girl is on fire. This girl is on fire. She's walking on fire. This girl is on fire. Everybody says she goes by, they can see the flame that's in her eyes. Watch her as she's lighting up the night. Nobody knows that she's a lonely girl. It's a lonely girl. She gon' let it burn, baby, burn, baby, burn, baby. This girl is on fire. This girl is on fire. She's walking on fire. This girl is on fire. Oh, oh, she's just a girl, and she's on fire.
Hey, good morning, Central. Welcome to our online worship service this morning. My name is Michael Ginger. I'm one of the pastors here. I want to be the first to say welcome. We are so glad that you're here this morning, especially if this is your first time. While we're kind of getting situated and settled, take a couple moments and using the comment section, say hello. Welcome folks to our service this morning. You might also hit that like or the share button. It's the easiest evangelism that you'll ever do, sharing this live feed with your friends on your wall. So do that for a couple minutes. It's also super helpful during the music or my sermon. In your bottom right-hand corner, if you're on Facebook Live, there are all those little hearts and likes and hug things. If you like something you hear, be it, again, music or prayer or scripture, hit those little buttons. It really encourages us, and it's the equivalent of clapping or dog barking that we're used to around here on Sunday mornings. So feel free to do that. While you're, again, getting settled, just a couple of announcements this morning. A couple weeks ago, I sent out a letter to the congregation that basically said that with other United Methodist churches in our conference, we are going to hold off on resuming in-person worship through the month of May. Today's the last day of May, so we need an update. My leadership team has been meeting to try to figure out what the best plan for Central going forward is. We've been consulting with local health authorities. We've been talking with denominational, that's a hard word, denominational leadership to try to decide what the best plan for Central is going forward. Bishop Jones, our bishop, sent out a letter last week that discouraged churches that worshiped 50 or more people from meeting for at least a few more weeks. In that letter, he also said that when churches get back together that are larger in size, there shouldn't be congregational singing and everybody should wear a mask. So with those kinds of things in mind, we've decided to hold off still a little while longer on in-person worship. It's hard for me to imagine getting together in this space that's already going to be really challenging to do social distancing, to not be able to sing together or see each other's faces, having to possibly tell people that they can't come in because we're at our 25 or 50% capacity, whatever that'll be. I can't imagine that being better than what we're doing online right now, Central. So for the time being, we're going to hold off on in-person worship. It's important, though, in this language, notice we're not using the word closed. The church is never closed, friends. In fact, the church in some ways is more alive than ever. We've adapted and become flexible. We're continuing to hear the word preached, to worship, to do service, and show love and compassion in our community. So this is not about the church reopening. It's about when can we get together in person again. And I think as my sermon about Pentecost is going to show today, the church can be really strong whenever she's spread out and distributed and doing work in the community. We're reminded the action isn't here in the sanctuary, it's actually out there where you're all watching. So I'd ask you to continue to pray for your leadership team, for me and my staff. These are really hard decisions to make. And so we just are seeking guidance and wisdom, both from God and from the health authority, right? To figure out what it looks like to open up safely. Council's going to be working on a more formalized plan. We're imagining some creative solutions where maybe we can do like a house church thing where folks gather in small communities to watch the live stream together and have some interaction that way. We're looking at a rotating schedule for our in-person space and also considering maybe large outdoor gatherings where we can spread out every once in a while. None of that is finalized or firmed up, but as soon as that is available, we'll release it to you for more information. So thank you for your support and for your commitment to keeping people safe during this time. The other announcement, the last couple weeks have been really tragic in our community. Unfortunately, racism and systemic injustice have reared their ugly heads, and the church has to talk about this, y'all. The church has to be at the front of leading conversations about dismantling racism, both from individuals and through systems. And so as George Floyd and Christian Cooper and Ahmaud Arbery, these names that we've seen in the media over the last couple of weeks, these stories are coming our way. We have to address this. So this morning, I want to lead us in a prayer. This is going to be my prayer, but I'd encourage you maybe to try it on for size and pray this as your own prayer. We're not foolish enough to think that prayer by itself is enough. I mean, the ancients, the church fathers and the church mothers had this great phrase where they said, ora et labora, which means prayer and work. And so we are going to be a people who continue to pray and a people who continue to work. I'm hopeful that with Cleve coming on staff as our new pastor of community equity and justice, that we'll begin having some really practical flesh and bone kind of ways of disrupting and dismantling racism in our community. In the meantime, I'd ask that you join me for prayer as we lament the racism that we've experienced in our community and our country this week. Pray with me, friends. Have mercy on me, O Lord. I have blinded my eyes. In spite of the clear evidence of deeply embedded racism all around me, I've looked the other way. Too many have died. Too many have suffered. Too many have been locked out and cast aside. Too many indignities, too many injustices, and I still looked the other way. Have mercy on me, O Lord. I have hardened my heart, believing the lie that blacks have the same opportunities as whites. I could not allow myself to admit that my life was shaped as much by racism as theirs, mine to benefit and theirs to harm. But it was, and it is, and it will continue to be. I have cared too little, I have grieved too little. Have mercy on me, O Lord. I have silenced my tongue. My voice has not been raised in prophetic rebuke and anger. My feet have not stepped out for justice alongside those who have more courage than I. And in my silence, I am an accomplice to bigotry. Forgive me, O Lord. I have sinned against you and against those who suffer the evil of racism. Indifference has smothered my soul and snuffed out fleeting impulses for reconciliation. I ask for your forgiveness, and I will appropriately seek their forgiveness. Empower me, O Lord. I need your strength to step beyond my blindness, indifference, and fear, to step toward those whom I have sinned against. I make no grandiose promises or plans today, for I know how easily those can be made and forgotten. But this I know, I cannot be the same, and I will not. Amen. Friends, it's our habit to start every service off the same way here. So, especially if you're new, hear these words of welcome. Whether you are over-churched or under-churched, whether you are a proud evangelical, a recovering evangelical, or not evangelical at all, whether you're used to high church or low church or no church, whether you consider yourself a passionate believer or just a hopeful skeptic, whether you graduated from Penn State or the state Penn, whether you are feeling socially isolated or you are worn out by community, you are welcome in this place. And just as this God of grace, love, and mercy welcomed us, may you be reminded that you, your whole self, your whole being, is also welcomed here. Ezra's going to come back on stage and lead us in some worship this morning. Central, we're so glad that you're here with us.
All right, Central, good morning again. Let's worship together. You are good, good. Oh, you are good, good. Oh, you are good, good. Oh, to go. I've been focused on what I could lose, and I lost touch, lost sight of you, and what is my own. Right here where I am, right here now. It's here. I'm cutting the cord, lifted away, where stop can't hold me down. Give me the rope that is tied around your neck. I'll cut it away, I'll set you free as you should be. No longer must we live under these burdens. You're my beloved, my kin, no more a slave. You're my beloved, my kin, no more a slave. You're my beloved, my kin, no more a slave. It's here, right here where I am, right here now. It's here. I'm cutting the cord, lifted away, where stop can't hold me down. I don't need to worry about tomorrow. All the work I need is what's ahead. I don't need to worry about tomorrow. All the love I make is what will stand. I don't need to worry about tomorrow. All the work I need is what's ahead. I don't need to worry about tomorrow. All the love I make is what will stand. I don't need to worry about tomorrow. All the work I need is what's ahead. I don't need to worry about tomorrow. All the love I make is what will stand here. Right here where I am, right here now. It's here. I'm cutting the cord, lifted away, where stop can't hold me down. Where stop can't hold me down. Where stop can't hold me down. Where the stop can't hold me down. Where the stop can't hold me down. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him above the heavenly host. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen. 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 Amen.
Hey, good morning, Central. If you're just tuning in, my name is Michael. I'm one of the pastors here. This is the time in our service where we talk about offering. It's one of those things I try to say the same every week because I think it's important we get this right. An offering isn't something that can be taken from you. That's called a tax. Instead, an offering is something that has to be given. It has to be offered. So please know this morning, if you're joining us online, you don't have to give to be here. We believe that God's grace is free. We also recognize that God does some pretty extraordinary things through the ordinary dollars and checks and online giving that comes into the church. And so if you're excited about the mission and vision, how Central is making a difference both locally and globally, we'd ask that you consider giving and giving generously this morning. We serve the most generous being that's ever existed. And so there's a part of us when we are generous, we are like God, the God that we love, the God that we serve. There's a couple easy ways for you to give. The first way is through our online giving. You can access that through our smartphone app or on our website. You can either choose to give a one-time gift or do recurring payments like Mariah and I do. That way we just don't have to think about it week to week. Whatever works for you works for us. It's an easy form to fill out that'll take you less than a minute. Another option is to bring by your cash or check donations to the building. There's a mail slot on 33rd at the white doors. You could drop that in there or get a hold of Beth or one of my staff people, and we can make sure that we collect that from you. So, as always, Central, thank you for your generosity, certainly financially, but your generosity of love and service and compassion and spirit. It's been amazing to watch you during this time, the ways that you are living out this calling that God has on us to show God's saving love to the world. Thank you for being a part of that. In just a second, the screen is going to pop up to give you some more instructions. Take a couple moments and look at that, decide what you want to do, and we'll be back. On the other side of the screen, we've compiled a video. Today's Pentecost Sunday. It's what my sermon's going to be about. It's what Ezra was singing about. And I asked some of our folks that speak languages that aren't English to record them saying the Lord's Prayer. And we put a montage together of all of those different snippets. And so we'll get a chance to pray together, just like those people gathered and heard the Spirit speaking in the same tongue, even though they all spoke different languages. We'll get to hear that prayer together. And so I hope this will be a nice visual and auditory reminder of that first Pentecost. So screen will pop up, and then we'll listen to that beautiful prayer, and then we'll get started with the sermon. So we'll be back in just a second.
Miaƒoƒo si le dziƒo, wo ade bubu wo ŋkɔ noti.
愿你的国降临，愿你的旨意行在地上，如同行在天上。
Geef ons heden ons dagelijk brood en vergeef ons onze schuld.
Wie auch wir vergeben unseren Schuldigen.
ولا تكلنا في التجارب لكن نجنا من الشرير.
Porque tuyo es el reino, y el poder, y la gloria, por todos los siglos. Amén.
Amen.
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 Hey, welcome back, everyone. I want to invite you to turn to the book of Acts, chapter 2. This will be our central passage for today. In the church calendar, this is a season that's called Pentecost, and this is one of the key texts. Now, whatever you have in your head about church, when I say the word church, whatever comes into your head, the passage that we're going to look at today, chapter 2 of Acts, is generally seen as the birth of the church. So for many people, this is where it starts. We're going to deal with the first 13 verses today. So let me just read it. And as you listen, think, this is church. Acts 2. When Pentecost Day arrived, they were all together in one place. Suddenly, a sound from heaven like the howling of a fierce wind filled the entire house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be individual flames of fire alighting on each one of them. They were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit enabled them to speak. There were pious Jews from every nation under heaven living in Jerusalem. When they heard this sound, a crowd gathered. They were mystified because everyone heard them speaking in their native languages. They were surprised and amazed, saying, "Look, aren't all the people who are speaking Galileans? Every one of them?" Which is a poetic way of saying, aren't these kind of simple people from the north part of Israel? How are they doing this? Verse 8. How then can each of us hear them speaking in our native language? Parthians, Medes, and Elamites, as well as residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, where they invented the pamphlet, Egypt and the regions of Libya bordering Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and converts to Judaism, Cretans and Arabs, we hear them declaring the mighty works of God in our own languages. They were all surprised and bewildered. Some of them asked each other, "What does this mean?" Others jeered at them, saying, "They're full of new wine." That's awesome. Now, what a passage, right? This is a passage that many people with a straight face throughout church history have spoken of as, oh yeah, the birth of the church. This is where the Church of Jesus started. And what I want to do is just walk through the questions that they ask within the story itself and reverse them. That's how the sermon is going to flow. So our first question is in verse 12. It says, they were all surprised and bewildered. Some of them asked each other, "What does this mean?" Which is a great question for us. What does this mean? And then one of the questions partway through verse 7, aren't all the people who are speaking Galileans, every one of them? And then the question after that, how then can each of us hear them speaking in our native language? So in order to get at what's going on in the passage, let me tackle the questions that they ask in the passage themselves. Now, the they are the first disciples of Jesus. So the first disciples of Jesus, chapter 1 says that Jesus' mother was there and all sorts of others. They were gathered together in the same place because it was the day of Pentecost. Now, hopefully at Central, you've learned that when you come across a big word, or a word that you don't know, or you come across significant words, you think, there's probably a backstory here. And one of the things we've seen in Jesus' teachings again and again is there's usually some other thing that happened way earlier that is totally shaping the story that we're reading. So, in answering the question, what does it mean? First, let's tackle the word Pentecost. In the first century Jewish consciousness, everything was shaped by the Exodus from Egypt. And we spent a lot of time talking about that story over the last year. Their people had been slaves in Egypt. And years earlier, God had rescued their people from slavery. So notice Exodus 12. The story of God rescuing people from slavery begins with God saying to these slaves in verse 2, "This month will be the first month. It will be the first month of the year for you. Tell the whole Israelite community on the 10th day of this month, they must take a lamb." And then in Exodus 12, these slaves are given specific instructions on a meal they were to have centered on a lamb, because that night they were going to be released and liberated from slavery. This is going to be the first month of the year for you. Now, this is the question that we have, isn't it? We screw up, we sin, we make mistakes, relationships fall apart, we get involved in things that are really destructive, and we end up with a mess on our hands. And our question is, can I get a new start? Is it always going to be like this? Or can I get the slate wiped clean? Can I get a tomorrow that is different from today? This is one of the fundamental existential questions of the human story. Is tomorrow going to be just another today, or can tomorrow be different? The Exodus story at its core is it's about a God who says, okay, it's going to be like the first month of a new year. And the first is a really big deal here. Tomorrow isn't just going to be a repeat of today. Are you with me? So this is one of the reasons why this story across religions and cultures and time periods has had such resonance. This God is not the God of despair. This is the God of hope. No, it's not always going to be like this. So these slaves in Egypt were told, it's all going to change. Have a meal. This meal was called the Passover meal. And then they were awoken. It's time to go. And they left Egypt. Now, when they left, there's a small detail in verse 38 about this group of people. They're described as an Erev Rav. In the CEB, the translation that we're using, it's translated a diverse crowd. It means a mixed multitude. When this group of people left their slavery, it wasn't just good Jewish people. It wasn't just Hebrew slaves. It was an Erev Rav. We would translate this in English as a motley crew, a ragtag group of nobodies, immigrants, dark-skinned, light-skinned, wealthy, poor, strangers and aliens in their midst. It is an absolute potluck of humanity. Say Erev Rav. Yeah, this is huge to the story. Central to a first century Jewish consciousness was that God rescued a group of Hebrew slaves out of Egypt, and all sorts of people joined in this rescue movement. People who didn't really fit the pattern, people from all different walks of life, slave, free, all sorts of people, a mix, a ragtag group of misfits stumbled out of Egypt. We'll come back to this later. Now, as slaves, and this is key to the story, they were owned by Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt. So they aren't technically free until Pharaoh is rendered helpless and powerless. And this happens when he can't get across the Red Sea, when the sea is parted, right? Charlton Heston was really involved in that. And then they get to the other side. He's really old, and they're free. And so in Exodus 15, they celebrate on the shores because now that our owner can't get us, we're really free. Notice Exodus 14, verse 30. The Lord rescued Israel from the Egyptians that day. So if you're taking notes, there is a Passover meal. Several days later, there is a defining event of liberation. And Miriam got out the tambourine, and there was a DJ, and they had a generator, and it was awesome. I mean, they just boogied on, right? That's essentially what happens. Miriam, Moses' sister, crafts this beautiful song about how the horse and rider have been thrown into the sea, and we are now free. Free at last. They then journey this ragtag Erev Rav into the wilderness for 50 days. Now, pentagram, 5 points. Pentagon, 5 sides. Pentecost, it has the number 5 in it. So Pentecost refers to 50 days. 50 days after the people have this defining moment of liberation, they come. And here's what it says in Exodus 19, verse 1. On exactly the 3rd month anniversary of the Israelites leaving the land of Egypt, they came into the Sinai desert. Sinai is where God gives them the 10, you probably know them as the 10 Commandments, the 10 words. By the way, in the giving of the 10 Commandments, the word commandment is nowhere in the Hebrew text. The 10 Commandments are not what they're called in the 10 Commandments story. They're called the 10 words. Because, you see, these people, they've been freed. They're no longer slaves. Who are they? So they've been liberated, but who are they? What's their identity? And at Sinai, God gives them an identity. You're now my people, and you are to show the world what my saving love looks like. I mean, these people are called to show the world what God's saving, liberating love looks like. Now, there are a couple of fascinating details about what happens at Sinai. Notice, like in verse 16, At Sinai, it says that there was thunder and lightning as the people are about to meet God at the mountain. Now, the word thunder is the Hebrew word kolot. Say kolot. Yeah, kol means voice, and the OT is like a plural ending, like S for us. Kolot means voices. So, when you read in the English, and there was thunder, in the Hebrew, it literally reads, and there were many voices. The word for lightning is actually the word for fire, esh, in the Hebrew. Fire and voices were some of the defining details of this event. Now, why Sinai? Sinai is the wilderness. Sinai is not a country as they thought of countries. There wasn't a political ruler who ruled over Sinai and you were like on their turf. There wasn't a governor who ruled over this province, and if you went there, you needed a park pass, right? No, Sinai is free from any political or national boundary. God meets this people in a place that no one owns, because no one owns this God. I mean, this God transcends any particular nation or political system or regime or party. This God transcends any way in which humans have carved up the earth. This God is above all that. Are you with me? And this God, in a place that transcends any race, nation, or boundary, in voices that remind them of thunder and fire, says, I have rescued you from Egypt. Here's the way to live. Here's the way to live. Here's my way. And they become a people. So, for a good first century Jew, every year you would celebrate Passover. Then, 3 days later, you would celebrate the Feast of First Fruits, which is the first crop or plant that came up out of the ground after it was buried in the earth. And then, 50 days later, you would celebrate Pentecost, the giving of the Torah, the 10 words, our birth as a people, liberated to share God's saving love with the world. Now, Jesus, in Matthew 26, celebrates the Jewish Passover with his disciples. He is then arrested, put through a trial, and executed. Several days later, Matthew 28, but each of the Gospels talks about this. Several days later, Jesus rises from the dead. So, several days later, they celebrated the Feast of the First Fruits, in which a seed is planted in the earth, and it comes out of the earth with new life. Jesus is buried and rises from the dead. Come on now, we're cooking. And then 50 days later, after this moment of liberation from death, Jesus' disciples are gathered together in Acts 2 when Pentecost Day arrived. Now, good first century Jews on the day of Pentecost, guess which story they would always read? Exodus 19 and 20. And you would tell about the God who is not owned by any nation. They would retell the voices and the fire and God's global, universal love for all humanity. The disciples, as good first century Jews, 50 days from Jesus' resurrection, have gathered together. They're going through the normal Jewish reading and liturgy, and it is at that moment that suddenly a sound from heaven like the howling of a fierce wind filled the entire house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be individual flames of fire alighting on each one of them. They were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit enabled them to speak, which means they were able to communicate God's saving, redeeming love to people from all over the world. Are you with me? Very, very interesting. Now, what does it mean? That was the question. Well, I assume if you're a first century Jewish follower of Jesus, your first thought would be, hey, Sinai is alive again. Like, God apparently is still looking for people. Apparently, God wants to display God's saving love for the whole world. Wow, Here we are reading about a God who transcends all national/political boundaries, who loves all of creation. We're reading a story, and it's in reading the story that we then encounter the same God. There are voices and fire enabling us to speak of the wonders of this God to these people who are from all around the world. So, Jesus follows this pattern, this calendar to a T. And in Acts 2, when we talk about the birth of the church, in some ways, you could say the idea of the church is a continuation of a desire and dream of God's from the very beginning. This desire for a group of people who will show his redeeming, liberating, saving love to the world. In some ways, you could say that the church is not a new idea. In other ways, you could say that it's a brand new idea because around this resurrected Christ, all this energy and movement and motion just exploded. Now, our next question from the text, it's in verse 7. They were surprised and amazed, saying, "Look, aren't all the people who are speaking Galileans? Every one of them." This is the question. How are we hearing this message? Because these are like ordinary Galileans. These people are from, where would they be from? They're from the West End, right? Like, is there anything even past 61st Street, y'all? I have no idea, right? These are ordinary West Enders, okay? What's happening in Acts 2 is ordinary Galileans and Erev Rav are being empowered to share God's saving love with all of creation. It is one thing to spectate. It is another thing to be empowered. Are we tracking? It's a very, very different thing. Many of you have had the chance to meet my friend Steve Regalado, though he may have introduced himself to you as Willy Wonka or Mr. Clean, or this week I believe it was Steve Boyardee. He's got a catchphrase that he uses around here all the time. Steve will usually greet you or say goodbye by saying, "God bless you, sucker." I think that'll probably be our next t-shirt design. God bless you, sucker, right? Steve is, he's unhoused. He lives in a tent. And yet, he's up at the church 3 days a week, helping prepare the meal, wash dishes, take out the trash. And if you ask him why he does this, he'll immediately start telling you about encountering this God that radically changed his life. He'll talk about being so full of love, with a capital L, that he can't help but let it overflow into everything he does. It's beautiful. Steve doesn't have formal theological training. He's not ordained. He doesn't even have a house. He's just Steve Boyardee, and he's been empowered. It's just this effortless, let me show you, let me tell you, let me witness to what I have encountered. See, when you say church, what do you mean? Because that's what I mean. What do you mean, church? Because in Acts 2, church is a global, diverse, empowered, mixed multitude of people from across the spectrum who have this beautiful thing in common. The resurrected Christ rescued me from darkness, and I'm going to be fine. And let me tell you about it. It's this beautiful, it doesn't fit in any categories. It doesn't fit in any boxes. That's probably why the text uses words like wind and fire, because it's wild and untamed, and you can't really control it. Are you with me? Now the third question in our text is verse 8. How then can each of us hear them speaking in our native language? Their experience with the Spirit of God immediately leads to more questions than answers. When the Spirit's on the move, in my experience, I generally have more questions than answers. Notice, by the way, this story is not people drawing conclusions about what's happening. They're experiencing it, and it's producing all sorts of wonder and awe and questions, which should probably say something about what it means to be a follower of Christ and what it means to be a part of the church. But within all of these questions and mystery, if we were to read it again and look for key words, what are the words in the passage? Like Suddenly, fierce wind, flames of fire, surprised, bewildered, amazed. Others jeered at them. I mean, Christians with a straight face for a long time have said, this is the foundational passage about the Church of Jesus. Are these the words, when you think of church, when you say church, what do you mean? Because this is the story. This is the story. It's always good for us to line up with the story as opposed to creating our own. Here's a word for it. The church is chaotic. A little bit of chaos, a little bit of order. Chaotic. Some of you are like, finally, I have a word for my parenting style, right? Yeah, finally, I have a word to describe college, right? Yeah, it's chaotic. It's chaotic. A little bit of chaos, a fair bit of order, and they're involved. They hold hands. They're in this like symbiotic dance. Often, what happens, of course, is institutions and leadership and structures get in place that essentially kill the chaos. We can't have that. And the Spirit, like Elvis, leaves the building. There's this sort of chaotic nature to the church. If you've been to Central even once, you've experienced this. It's got some edges. We've experienced chaos to the point where it was bad, like painful, embarrassing. But the problem is that within the chaos is often life. So it's possible for the pendulum to swing to order. I'm tired of all that. Let's just get things. And then what happens is we lose that wonder and awe of what it was like when we were just being carried along by the Spirit. It's chaotic. If you lose the chaotic nature of it, you lose something elemental to its essence. Are you with me? That's the key. The Spirit doesn't really work on our timetables and structures. Sinai is free from all the other boundaries and national identities. It's a place of wonder and mystery where God does what God wants to do, and we race to keep up. There's an Australian scholar, his name is Alan Hirsch, and he's done some great writing. And he's drawing on the work of another scholar named Rodney Stark, shout out to Baylor, dealing with the sociology of the early Christian movement. And Hirsch draws some stunning connections. Listen to this. He points out that in the Roman Empire, in the year 100 AD, so roughly 70 years after the resurrection of Christ, the Roman Empire in 100 AD estimated that there were about 25,000 Christians. Now, at this time, it was illegal to be a Christian. There were no church buildings. There were no scriptures, as we know the scriptures today. They had the Hebrew scriptures, and obviously pieces of the New Testament were floating around, but there wasn't a solidified, this is the New Testament. And it was hard to join. There are these early church fathers who, like, people would come up and want to join. Excellent. You can take upon yourself the teachings of Jesus. You can join up with our community, and you can try loving your enemies, try giving to the poor, try fasting and praying. And then, over time, if after taking seriously the demands of Jesus, you still want to do this, then we will have a service where we will have you confirmed. So it was always, wait. Are you serious about following Jesus? Because it's not easy. So let's see. Try it on. Let's see if it works for you. Hirsch points out that in the year 100, they estimate that there were about 25,000 Christians. Illegal, no buildings, no scriptures, hard to join. They estimate that by the year 320, there were 20 million Christians in the Roman Empire. So 25,000 to 20 million in roughly 200 years. So apparently, with this movement, make it illegal. Make it hard. Take away all our building, and this movement thrives. Why? Because take away the buildings, take away the budgets, make it illegal, make it hard to join, and all you're left with is people going, hey, my life has been changed. That's all you got. Apparently, that's more powerful than all the other stuff. I think this is what we've been learning during our time of social distancing. Friends, we've never closed the church. We've just lived into this historic truth that the church is so much bigger than our buildings. Like, this isn't where the action happens. And think about the things that have been happening while we haven't been able to use our building. We've connected with immigrant families that we might not have before this pandemic. We've adapted to online worship that's allowed people to log in from New York and Georgia and Michigan and Arkansas and Mexico. And I've heard incredible stories of you stepping up and caring for your neighbors in amazing ways. I don't want to make light of the horrors and tragedies and loss of life that have resulted from COVID-19. But we've learned so much and have had a rare opportunity to recalibrate and refocus. I mean, a Pentecost of our own, of sorts. So what do you mean when you say church? Do you mean your own narrow slice of experience? Do you mean South Texas church tradition? Do you mean a set of abstract theological things that either you believe, or if you question them or doubt them or don't follow those exact ones, you're a heretic and should be kept in a, like what do you mean? Because in Acts 2, it's a wild, untamed, global, diverse, empowered community of people of all shapes and sizes and skin colors and genders and sexualities, and who have all met the resurrected Christ and witnessed to the God whose grace wins. It doesn't fit in any categories. Nobody owns this God. Sinai is in the wilderness. Are you with me? See, that's really significant that when we talk about church, we are not just talking about our own particular narrow sociocultural experience. I mean, the church is global, universal, ancient, thriving, exploding to this day all over the world. It's this beautiful, diverse movement of people who are caught up in something like a fierce wind, like flames of fire. I think the reason why they use those images is because the experiences that shape you the most, you always end up using metaphor. We read it and we go, what an odd story, flames of fire, wind, what an odd story. But when you tell your story, I guarantee that the moments that most shaped you, you end up using metaphors. It's like I was on fire. It's like there was this wind that was just carrying us along. I mean, some things can't be contained with simple, straightforward language. We have to use poetry, images, and symbolism. A couple of questions to wrap things up. Do you have this fire? Do you have this fire? Do you have this wind? Maybe you met Jesus at some point, but the truth is it's become kind of boring and routine. Reading the Bible, praying, going to church. Yeah, I guess I'm supposed to witness. Wait. Church, are these people who are caught up in something and empowered and captivated and amazed and perplexed and bewildered? Following Jesus is supposed to be thrilling and intoxicating and filled with wonder and awe. That's the story. Is there any way in which you've lost that? It's just kind of routine now. Or you've never had it. What happens in Acts 2 is people were reminded that the story was still alive of Sinai. And so anytime we were reminded that the story is still alive, the Spirit continues to move. God is always looking for a people. We are at that point of carrying on an ancient, thriving, global, diverse, empowered tradition that is unbelievable, amazing, bewildering and perplexing. We've gathered online today because we are a part of that. Perhaps you're here and you've lost something of that. And maybe today you need to open yourself up to a fresh wind, to another kind of fire, to reclaim what it means to be a part of the church. Let's pray, friends. God, we acknowledge that your movement is chaotic in nature. You shock us. You surprise us. Your Spirit blows wherever she wants. And we're left often with more questions than answers. We thank you for the resurrected Christ who speaks to our deepest longing to know that tomorrow doesn't have to be just like today. That there can be a first month of a new year, that there can be a fresh start, that there can be a new tomorrow. God, we don't want to be spectators. We don't want to just be inspired. We want to be empowered. We want to be witnesses who actually are the message. So God, I thank you for my friend Steve and the countless ways in which you show us in flesh and blood what your love looks like. When Galileans, when a mixed multitude, when all of us from all of these different backgrounds are captured by your saving love. We thank you for this. And in the name of the resurrected Christ, everybody said, Amen. Friends, it's been so good being with you this morning. Central, may you reclaim this vision of church that's wild and untamed, that's like a fierce wind and flames of fire. All that really means for us is go and be central. Ezra's going to come back on stage and lead us in one more song. We'll be singing the Lord's Prayer after we heard that beautiful rendition of it from our congregants this morning. Thanks for worshiping with us. We'll see you again same time online next week. Grace and peace.
Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come quickly. Your will be done the same.